Hello, Shem. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, Essie. I'm good. I'm good. It's been a busy few days here. How are things on your end?
Yeah, as usual, very big.
So, in Japan, there's been some interesting news. TSMC is building a huge new facility for microchip fabrication in the Japanese countryside.
Yes, I heard that information. Aside from that, I have participated in the SEMI Cybersecurity Committee, and I also mentioned OpenChain during the meeting.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and the chairperson of the committee uh, came from TSMC.
Ah, thank you for spreading the word to them. I hope that sometime in the future we might be able to work with TSMC.
It's my pleasure, but it seems like they have never heard OpenChain before. It's the opportunity to spread out the news.
Yes, that's a really good point. Now, we had tried to communicate, but I think we didn't have the right contacts. What's the best environment to talk to TSMC?
Um, Let me think. Maybe we can arrange a webinar or discussion during the SEMI Cybersecurity Committee meeting.
Ah, that sounds really good if we can do it.
Yes, because the members in the committee, not only the TSMC, but other SEMI semiconductor companies.
Well, let's try and arrange that. Now, I notice several people have joined the call, so we will officially begin. Welcome to our monthly North America Asia call. This call is designed to make sure that everyone in Asia has a chance to participate in the editing of the specification. We are following on directly from the call we had just a couple of weeks ago with North America and Europe. The topics today will build on that, but before we dive in, I'm going to show the antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every meeting. If you have any questions, you can ask our counsel, Andy Updegrove. You will also find the full antitrust policy notice on our website. To dive straight in, we usually have news, then we work on our standards and core material. Then there's a space for any other business, so you can raise any topic that you might have, and then we close the meeting. I'm going to quickly run through some of the news we had. This was shared previously with the last meeting, and there are some interesting milestones. So our Japan work group has submitted their SPDX Lite proposal for SPDX3. This allows a lightweight, easy to use version of SPDX to be picked up and applied by companies. We expect SPDX3 to be formally released very soon, so this submission is timely. The next piece of news is that there has been a lot of OpenChain activity in China. And one of the exciting things that just happened was the first OpenChain conference in China. In collaboration with CAICT and SegTrend and Huawei, we held the OpenChain Open Source Governance Conference in Shenzhen. As well as doing that, we had events in Beijing and Shanghai. We had a lot of feedback from government agencies like CAICT and CESI. We spent a great time with companies like China Mobile and SAIC, which is China's largest automaker. And in short, OpenChain is very popular in that very important market. Another important thing is that the Open Compliance Summit 2023 has been announced. It will take place on the 7th and 8th of December. You are very welcome to start submitting talks, panels, and other ideas for communication. In the two-day event, we expect to have a series of talks and panels, but also workshops that take practical deep dives. We're looking at having an automation workshop. We're looking at having an automotive workshop, and other workshop ideas are most welcome. Another piece of interesting news is that the reuse specification version 3 is now out as CC0 via the OpenChain website. For those who are not familiar with it, this is a specification that explains how to reuse software. It is available through the reuse website under a license more normal to specifications or restricted license. But we've hosted a CC version for many years to allow people to directly include it in business logic. The new CC version is the latest version of reuse, and you will find it in our reference library. I'll just pause here to see if anyone has any questions. Okay, if there are no questions, let's jump right into our work on standards and core material. On the last call at the beginning of May, we discussed some important things around the licensing specification. One of those was how to improve the terms and definitions. Now, we added a few words on our side, basically saying that the terms and definitions apply to this version of the specification, making clear that for new versions of the specification, you should double check the terms and conditions. We also included a new section in terms and definitions with material from IETF. This is material that describes what words mean: could, must, should. The idea here is to create even greater clarity, especially for translations or non-native speakers, in understanding the specification. This is quite a large change to the terms and definitions, basically a large expansion for the purpose of making things clearer. We also adapted the SPDX definition to a more generic software bill of materials definition, which cites SPDX. The reason is simple. When we started, software bill of materials were just getting started too, and they were not well defined. What we did at that time was to use SPDX as a descriptive baseline. However, the market has moved on. There are definitions of bill of materials, and we are working to ensure that our specification matches the mental models presented by organizations like NTIA in the United States of America. We have adopted the mental model that NTIA uses, and we have cited SPDX as our inspiration. And that brings us to today. Today is about alignment, alignment, and alignment. It's about taking what we've done with the licensing spec future draft, so version 3, and adding it to the security spec future draft. The purpose is simple: to make sure that our sister specifications match on all important core topics. There are 2 new GitHub issues to cover this stuff. But before we get started, I wanted to just show you where the current versions of the standards are. I'm putting this in the chat. And where the drafts are. So the drafts are where the changes are located. For example, in the licensing spec, 3rd generation draft 3.0 is where you will find the changes to terms and definitions, and you will find the changes to software bill of materials. Let me share in the chat what we did to the licensing spec on the last call. This will allow you to very quickly open up and double check what happened. And in the chat again, I will now include what we are scheduled to do today. What we are going to look at for the security spec to align with the licensing spec. So this is about aligning the security spec draft with what we've seen in the licensing spec. In a very practical way, I'm going to open up the first issue, terms and definitions, and show you what's going on. So here we are. The terms and definitions were changed. And the change is from simply saying, for the purposes of this document, the following terms and definitions apply, into having a full explanation of what we mean. The original sentence, the change saying that these terms and definitions only apply to this version of the specification, and then this section of text from IETF REC 2119, which explains what must not, required, shall not, should not, recommended, may, and optional can be interpreted as. I'm going to pause here and take a moment to give you a chance to read this and ask any questions. So I'm just going to pause for 1 minute. Okay. Does anyone have any comments, suggestions, questions, or ideas? Remember, there's no wrong comment, suggestion, or ideas. We're gathering feedback here. We're building a draft. The previous call, the suggestions that you see were created to help with clarity. I suppose the question for this call is, does that help with clarity? What do you think?
It looks good to me. But I have one question. As you mentioned here, the must, I think the meaning of the must is identical to required or shall. So my question is that um, why we have the three, identical wording here?
A really good question. A really good question. So in this case, the exact wording with the three same meanings is just to indicate, particularly for interpretation. For example, if a lawyer looks at this, or if a translator looks at this, if they find any of those three words, it's exactly the same. In a small specification like ours, it probably does not matter too much because we probably will be able to make sure that we only use one word when we go through it. But in a very large specification with hundreds or thousands of pages, people might use different words, basically by mistake or slightly different styles or copy paste another specification section. And this is to just make sure that people know that if it says must or required or shall in different places, it means the same thing.
Okay, thank you for your elaboration.
Oh, no, it was a really good question because it seems pointless to have three words for one meaning. But it's really, I think it's to catch the bad behavior of people writing in English. Is another way of putting it. Okay. Are there any other comments or suggestions? I mean, if people don't disagree, we are going to change the terms and definitions overview into this larger section of text. So it's sort of
Hi,
important.
Sam.
Hi, singing. Hey.
I would like to give a suggestion that maybe we can put the mark in front of that must not, should not, to make it more coincident with the word behind, like required, shall not. I forgot how to say this. Yeah.
That makes sense. Our challenge is that I'm going to just highlight the piece of text here. So this piece of text, this block of text, is exactly what the IETF said. So our challenge is that we could add something before it, but we can't change the IETF text, or else we will. Let me pull up the exact IETF text for us.
Oh, I see. I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your explanation. I understand it.
No, yeah, I'm sorry as well because I get the point, and I think, how about we add a comment? How about we add a comment to try to make this clearer? I'm just looking at this. Okay, so, hey, they have a larger part of the abstract here. Nope. What we have is this bit.
Yes.
So we have exactly that bit. We could add something before it or do something else to make it clearer. Singing, this is, I know, inconvenient, but I was wondering if you would consider making a suggestion on the GitHub issue of this idea. I don't mean to put you under pressure to get something complete, but just to help describe what you see, because nothing is more important than a non-native speaker interpretation. And we can make this better. So if you can add a comment, I'm going to make sure we cover that in the next call.
Yes, okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I will do it later.
Thank you, Singing. That's really, really helpful. Yeah. Yes, but I know what you mean. I just need help. I need help to get it right.
Okay, I will do it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's so much. One of the biggest challenges we have, I think the fact is that most of the world is using this specification for their supply chain in non-native English speaking countries. And we're coming from a specification originally drafted by native speakers. And we've changed our specification a lot. But when we include part of someone else's work, suddenly we have the native speaker challenge again. And we also have a culture challenge. You know, there is a difference between what Americans think words mean and people in Britain think they mean. So when we say IETF and so on, we often have to read it thinking about American English. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And it's very useful for us to use the section from IETF because that means we match the mental model they have, but we can add better explanation before. We can't change what they said, but we can add a better explanation. Wow, thank you. That catches something important. So I'm going to update. Oh, there's a question from Ninjoji-san that just came in. He asked, does it not conflict? Does the IETF stuff not conflict with the ISO standards wording? So the answer is, if there's a conflict, we'll work on that. The apologies, I have hay fever. The IETF wording was proposed and discussed on the last call because the telco spec is using it. If there is a conflict with the ISO text, with the ISO definitions, we will update our drafts after discussion. And I imagine if we do update them, we will resolve the conflict probably in favor of ISO. So the current proposal, the IETF one, came from our community and we included it on the last call. An alternative proposal or pointing out a conflict is super welcome. So I'm making a note here. So I'm making a note here that we have had this conversation. I'm keeping the issue open for improvement to clarity. Singing potential flag for ISO versus IETF language conflicts by Joji set. Okay, to check for. Okay, so I'm noting here that I'm updating the spec, but I'm keeping the issue open for improvement to clarity suggestion by Singing and potential flag to check for ISO versus IETF language. So Ninjoji-san, we will check based on what you gave us. And we're fortunate SZ has jumped in to talk about the definitions in ISO. Okay, so I'm just going to add ISO definitions. Okay, so I just added those to review. Please note the IETF definitions were proposed and applied by compliance. Okay. Sorry for the formality in all of this. I'm trying to make sure that we go through the things in basically the order that they were proposed. Okay, so my super quick look at the ISO definitions versus the IETF. Sorry, IETF must, required, shall, may, can. Okay, I don't see an immediate huge conflict, but I know that we need to review it. So we have added this information and the review will be on the next call. Okay. Right. That is fantastic. We've dug out something that is clearly going to be very important. Perfect. Okay, the next part is the SBOM thing. And this is also copying what happened on the last call to the licensing spec and basically saying, well, we should make sure that the security spec says the same thing. Just like before, I'm going to give you a minute to read what we have and what the change would be. Okay, so I'm going to give 1 minute for that. Okay, okay. So, what do you think? What do you think? This is basically taking the NTIA concept or language of a complete inventory for software, a list of ingredients that make up software components. That's what NTIA says. And that changes from saying a structured format that allows the exchange of information for a software package. Okay, so we're talking about a complete inventory, a list of ingredients now. Why? When we began, software bill of materials was new. So when we tried to talk about information in a structured format, that was a new idea. And then we talked about what it could be, what it could be, because people had no idea. But nowadays, if we talk about an inventory for software, a list of ingredients that make up software components, the understanding is generally higher. And by using basically the same definition as NTIA, we make sure that we're not telling people that we're not telling people something that sounds different. What do you think? Is this a good idea or not?
Hello, Shen. This is SD. I think the change looks good. My suggestion is that shall we add the minimal requirement for the software bill of materials? For example, if some vendor they don't familiar with the software bill of material, they may just have their own format, the software version and the software name, and that's it. So I'm just thinking about adding the minimal requirement from the NTIA.
It's a really, really valid idea to have that, but there is a challenge. We've always explained the what and not the how. So if we told people what the minimum is, instead of saying, for example, XYZ, if we said this is the minimum, we'd be telling how. So it would change from what into how. Now, it doesn't mean we can't somehow reference this, but we couldn't require it because we only do the what, not the how. So the example is in the old definition, we say usefully include various items as opposed to should or must include. This one doesn't have any of that, so we can definitely talk about somehow trying to guide people towards the minimum, but we couldn't require it with the direction, with the guidance we have for the spec of saying what, but not how. So
Right. So, yep, I think it makes sense. So, um, we need to put some guidance in somewhere. Otherwise, uh, the reader, I mean, the vendor will, will confused and don't know how to implement the software bill of materials.
a very good
Not
point.
here, but just the guidance or some, FAQ or somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. It strikes me that somehow we might include a reference to SPDX Lite being useful here, maybe. But I noticed Bakuchi-san, you're also unmuted. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on this, but just curious about the complete set, complete, the word complete inventory.
Yes, yes.
It is very strong for me.
You're completely right. And let me see if I can pull up the NTIA one. That is different to the NTIA. They say a nested inventory, not a complete inventory. So it's close, but not the same. What happened there? Why was the word complete instead of nested used?
Yeah.
On the last call, it was proposed that the requirement for completeness should be there to prevent people sending fragmentary software bill of materials. That was the proposal. That does not mean that we have to do it, but that's the rationale. There was a concern that fragmentary bill of materials could be provided and technically meet the requirements of the specification, but not at all be useful. So one example would be someone provides a full, let's say, IVI system, which is using Linux, it's using Android Auto, and they provide a bill of materials which only covers their applications. It doesn't cover the Linux distro, the Android open source project. So the receiving company has a fragment and just can't use it. They have to redo the bill of materials. So that was the purpose of complete. But it doesn't mean we have to keep that word.
Okay, I understand your explanation, and that makes sense. But if I don't have such a background, the completeness, perhaps the Japanese reader is confused by this word.
That's a really good point. We don't have to answer it now.
Yeah.
But do you have an idea?
No, I'm not a native, and I don't have a word.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, my natural habit as a political scientist would be to go from, I'm just going to put this in the comments just to show. My natural habit would be to simply say this. It's an inventory for software.
Yeah, the definition itself is here, but we want to we want to なんて言うんだろう we want to aim at the completeness.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand the background. Yeah.
What do you think? This is really great, because looking at this, is it possible that somehow we could use terms to bring people to SPDX Lite? Now, I'm not saying that this term usefully include SPDX Lite is not intended to be the wording.
Yeah.
But is it somehow possible that when we go, for example, so that people would read complete inventory for software, they might panic. Then they see an example of SPDX. It's quite big. They might panic. Then we continue to say SPDX.
And I have another viewpoint, and the other is if we are in the license specification, the original OpenChain specification, we need only a license profile. But in the assurance, perhaps maybe we need a security or vulnerability profile. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that is why I asked completeness.
Correct. Absolutely good point. With the new profiles in SPDX, what could be understood as complete would be completely different to SWID or Cyclone DX.
Yeah, and in the context of original OpenChain specification, and in the context of assurance OpenChain specification, the context is different, I think. They require another SBOM, I think.
That's a good question. That's a good point.
And also, I want to ask one question. What is the consensus for the SBOM in the OpenChain community? Because there is many profiles in the current, the proposed SPDX V3. And so there are AI, there are SaaS, there are light, and there are vulnerability. So what is the consensus for what is SBOM?
That's so
That
true.
is a very difficult question for us, because the SPDX V3 is has a very huge variety of bombs.
Correct. And also we have, for example, people using Cyclone, but Toyota is using SPDX plus T, their own extension. Siemens have forked Cyclone into the Siemens SBOM. So yeah, this is a very good point. Okay, here's my suggestion.
Mm.
I'm going to write a comment that flags complete could be confusing because there's so much out there. So that's a response actually to the last call conversation. I'm also going to flag that in our example of SPDX, maybe we can extend it to include SPDX Lite as an example, so that people realize that they have options, that they don't have to, even if we use the word complete, they don't have to use all of SPDX. They could use SPDX Lite. Maybe I include that as a comment as well. And then on the next call, we restart the discussion on this topic to try to especially cover the what is complete, what is the SBOM now that there's AI and blah blah blah.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Singing.
I also want to add a comment with DEX SZ that when I talk with the company, they always ask me that what kind of SBOM you can accept. So maybe the wording like name, version, origin, license, copyright is aligned with the open source compliance, like our OpenChain compliance, because this is more minimal requirement because it's a compliance specification. So the license and copyright is very important in here. And could we show up these wording in the specifications? Because I always they always ask me this kind of words, and yeah, we don't have like a good suggestion to them. Yeah.
That's a good point. So they want to know what their options are.
Yes, they need suggestions. And what I can explain to them is like, okay, you can create your SBOM and maybe your vendor will, your user, your customer will require you what kind of category they want to collect, but actually it's not a useful explanation for them because they have no idea what should they do in the minimal requirement.
Okay. Is it possible that we should go back to our first definition and take part of that original text and include it?
Yes, that might be good for my end.
Okay. So this would be to add another example. SBOM specification used could use. Okay. I'm just going to put this stuff together into an example of what could be the next version. And then I will ask, I'm so sorry to ask people to read again. But here's the expanded suggestion. If people could take a moment to read it and just let me know their thoughts, that will be super useful. Okay. So the text is a lot bigger than before. Is this better or worse? While people continue to think about it, I'm actually going to steal this sentence. Sorry for moving the text. This sentence is really hard. I'm just wondering if I could make this sentence easier. Because that sentence talks about license and copyright information. I wonder if we really need to talk about that when, there's different profiles and so on, and we point people at SPDX Lite anyway, which includes this information inherently. And then later we talk about license and copyright again. This would result in a shorter update. Does this update make sense to you? Okay, Singing likes this update. Fukuchi-san, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. Basically okay, but my personal opinion, the complete and SPDX is different.
Yeah.
That confused me.
Got it. Who's going to put?
Yeah, if the complete means the full range of software, covering the software range, it is understandable. But what is a complete inventory?
Got it. It seems like that word might be problematic. So, okay, I'm going to remove that word in our proposal. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update our draft with the same language, the language we don't really want
Yeah.
for software bill of materials, but I'm going to flag the concerns and propose that we get rid of complete. We simplify the SPDX sentence. We give an example of SPDX Lite, and then we say, regardless of the SBOM used, it could include name, version, origin, license, copyright, and known vulnerabilities. That sounds like it might solve our problem.
Okay. Yes. I think our ideal and how to are the separate should be separated.
Yeah. Maybe complete is getting too prescriptive, moving from what into how. Okay, I'm going to flag that. which is what we talked about with SC earlier. Complete is a matter of opinion, right? Especially with multiple profiles. Okay. That means we're going to update the security spec with the imperfect one to match licensing. We're going to flag a concern. We're going to explain why, especially the word complete. And that will be proposed to update both licensing and security spec next time. In other words, huge progress, huge improvement. While we still need to discuss it on the next North America-Europe call, I actually think that our adjusted version here is a lot better. Okay. I think, we're nearly at the hour, so let's call it a day on these two topics. We have aligned the terms and definitions, but we found it problem to check. So there's future work to do there. We're aligning the SBOM material, but we have a substantial proposal to improve the text to review next time. So in other words, it looks like we've made really big progress. I want to thank you all. As soon as the call ends, I'm going to fix my comment and submit it. In case you need a recap, our comments are here and here. The first link is finished. The second link is pending. I'll do that as soon as the call ends. Thank you all for your time. Thank you so much for helping with this progress. I see great improvements in the specification thanks to your work. Have a beautiful day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and of course, stay happy.
Thank you, Shen. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.